Started. But I feel you with the violence on Twitter thing. It's not hard. Oh man. Shoot. All right. Let me just go to this on Facebook. All right, I'm ready in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Jansen Harris here with the Flying High podcast. Joining me is Aaron Freeman with the Locked On Falcons podcast. Thank you for joining me, man.
I appreciate you having me.
Appreciate you too. Falcons, they dropped their first preseason game Friday, 23-3 against the Titans. Let's talk about Felipe Franks. A lot of hype from that game, a lot of noise. What's your take on his performance against the Titans?
I think Franks did a good job showcasing his athleticism and his mobility. And certainly those are the exciting plays when you have an offense that was stagnating as much as it did on Friday night against the Titans. Basically, when he wasn't scrambling, they couldn't really move the ball pretty effectively. So understandably, it got people excited. We saw the talent level. Maybe we didn't necessarily see the consistency as a passer, but, that was kind of the book on Felipe Franks in his college days. Very talented player, but just didn't have the consistency. And hopefully, as these preseason games wear on, we'll get to see a little bit more consistency from him as a passer. But I think it was a positive start for the most part for him. But obviously, as is the case with many players on the Falcons offense on Friday night, they need a little bit more from all of those guys.
Back to Franks. Do you see his running ability? Because he had 76 yards rushing, right? Do you see that being implemented maybe in the regular season, like in some gadget type of plays, or do you think it's too soon to tell?
Well, I think right now you probably won't really see much of that in it, especially in a world where you're assuming Franks makes the roster, which is not a world I'm quite ready to live in right now. I think he definitely put a relatively good foot forward in that regard, but I'm not quite sure he's there yet. And I think right now he's still probably destined for the practice squad. So I don't think it's something that the Falcons have to really think that they have to utilize. I mean, if they do want to do some gadget stuff, they still have a player like Russell Gage who can line up in the backfield. We saw him last year do some of that sort of wildcat stuff. So I feel like Gage is probably a better fit in that role if the Falcons do want to implement a little bit more gimmick and gadget stuff.
Speaking of slow starts, A.J. McCarron, he was only 5 for 12, 36 yards. Are me and some other Falcon people, is there the overreaction? Should we just chill out and wait for game 2? What's your assessment on A.J. McCarron so far?
Well, I mean, it's funny because people talk about overreacting to preseason. It goes both ways, right? You get someone just doing a little bit of good and people think this guy's destined for the Hall of Fame. You see a little bit of bad and people think this guy has no business being in the NFL and is basically stealing money from the team. I feel like A.J. McCarron's poor performance is probably a tad overrated. Obviously, I think most of the issues that the offense had were less on the quarterbacks and more on not having a running game, not having good blocking, not having receivers separating, being put in situations where, AJ McCarron's in situations on 1st and 20 with third stringers, 3rd and 12, 3rd and 16 with 3rd and 4th string players. And that's not really a situation that any quarterback should be put in and think that he's going to put his best foot forward. I think AJ McCarron is still probably the front runner for the Falcons' backup quarterback job. It's reminiscent to me a little bit of two summers ago in the Hall of Fame game where Matt Schaub came out, struggled against Denver in that first preseason action. People got very negative towards it. Kurt Benkert played well in that game, and people were like, give Benkert the job. It's a similar dynamic between Franks and McCarron. But then Schaub went out, played lights out the rest of the summer. Benkert really didn't do a whole lot. And I just think, people say don't overreact to one preseason game in a positive way, but I think you also have to take that advice and say, no, don't overreact to a preseason game in a negative way, especially when AJ McCarron, I think, was really put behind the 8 ball in a lot of ways.
Jansen Harris here with Aaron Freeman, the Locked On Falcons. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcast. We're also presented by Yah Socks and Your Future Media. Aaron, one thing I always appreciated about you was you always made it simple to kind of understand the offensive line. I loved your breakdowns on that and the key positions you're looking at. The Falcons, they have offensive line issues. Can you explain some of them and how you see this playing out?
Yeah, I think the good thing for the Falcons right now, even though it was a lot of bad on Friday night with the offensive line, is that most of their starters did not play. So I don't think Friday night is an accurate reflection of what we should expect to see when we get to week 1 with this offensive line. I think there's still at least a little room for optimism, but it did cause a lot of concerns. You certainly looked at this unit, given some of the injuries that they've had so far this summer up front. You did question the depth, and I think that got a little exposed on Friday night with their sort of second string unit not doing a great job. But at the same time, at least in theory, one of the players that played on Friday night is likely to start at left guard because the Falcons did not have their starting left tackle, Jake Matthews, in the game, their center, Matt Hennessy, right guard, Chris Lindstrom, and presumptive right tackle starter, Caleb McGarry, in the game. But whoever is going to fill that left guard position, whether that's Josh Andrews, the veteran who really struggled on Friday, whether that's rookie center Drew Dahlman, or whether that's rookie right tackle Jalen Mayfield, it seems like, at least internally, if the Falcons are going to go with one of the players already on the roster at that left guard position, that player played on Friday night and struggled. And so you do have some concerns at that left guard position. I think in general with the offensive line, you can make do with one weak link on the offensive line. You can sort of give that guy a little help in the left guard position, at least on the interior line of the offensive line. Typically gets a little bit more help than other positions from the center. And so you can somewhat mitigate that. But I think the concern with the Falcons you have is you don't really know what you have at the center position in Matt Hennessy because he doesn't have a ton of experience. You do question a little bit about the right tackle position with Caleb McGarry, who's been inconsistent in his first 2 years in the NFL. So you have a lot of question marks on the Falcons offensive line that haven't quite been answered and may not be answered really at all this summer. So I think the issue that the Falcons are going to have to deal with is you have some concerns about your starters, you have some concerns about your depth, and then you have a quarterback in Matt Ryan where these last couple of years, I don't think it's a coincidence that Matt Ryan's performance has not been up to, his usual standards these last couple of seasons, coinciding with the fact that the Falcons' interior offensive line has not been particularly good these last 2 years. And the way that Matt Ryan plays football is, he's a pocket quarterback and he wants to have that clean pocket to step up into. And that's been an issue for Matt Ryan throughout his career. And I think as he gets older and you see probably a little bit less of his ability to make some of those off-platform and second chance opportunity plays by extending the play outside the pocket, that's not going to get better at age 36 and beyond. And so having concerns on the Falcons' interior offensive line, I think certainly can be problematic for the Falcons. So if their interior offensive line struggles to the degree that I think at times on Friday night it looked like it might, that could be a big issue for the Falcons. But at the same time, I don't think we're at the point right now where it's time to hit the panic button. We'll have to sort of see how the starters perform this weekend or next weekend against Miami. And if they struggle in that game, then I think maybe it's time to hit the panic button, but not, I think right now it'd be a little premature.
Speaking of Miami, do you expect Kyle Pitts to make his debut? A lot of tweets going around. I read some of your tweets too saying, hey, fair enough. Justin Fields played well. There's highlights on Trey Lance, the 80-yard bomb. But if Kyle Pitts played, there would have been a whole bunch of things on him. Do you expect him to play? And how do you think he'll be used? How long do you think he'll play?
Yeah, I fully expected him to play Friday night, even for a few snaps. We didn't get that. So I fully expect him, I'm doubly expecting him to perform next Saturday against Miami. And that will be his debut. And I think the expectations, I have high expectations for Kyle Pitts. I think everybody has high expectations for Kyle Pitts. We'll find out if we wind up regretting having those high expectations. But I assume he will play well. I think the Falcons will certainly make an effort to get him involved in whatever game he winds up playing, presumably this Miami game coming up early on. And I think in the preseason, you're not expecting the Falcons to throw everything at defenses. They're just going to basically run the very basic foundations of their offense to just get guys comfortable and use a fair way of evaluating them. So I think in terms of Kyle Pitts usage, you will see glimpses of how they'll use him in the regular season, but it's not going to be as if they're reinventing the wheel. But I think once we get to see him on the field, he will certainly have opportunities to make plays. And certainly I think, that will be in the best interests of fans like me who are sitting here, wondering what could have been, if we had gotten, 3 or 4 catches from Kyle Pitts on Friday night. I think that sort of void in our minds would be filled by something.
Aaron, I want to ask you this. I know it's going back a little bit, but if you were Terry Fontenot with that number 4 pick in the draft, were you shocked by him selecting a tight end? Yes, he's going to be used as a wide receiver. Were you shocked they didn't go offensive line or quarterback?
I mean, to a degree, yes. I knew tight end was certainly, and Kyle Pitts was on the board. I knew that was, if the Falcons weren't in love with a quarterback, they would have taken Kyle Pitts. He seemed like the obvious choice there if they weren't going to go in that direction. But it did seem like most of their offseason moves were leading up to them taking quarterback. And so I was a little bit surprised on draft night when they did not take a quarterback. The Kyle Pitts selection made sense at the time. My personal opinion, if I was Terry Fontenot, I would have taken Justin Fields. I just thought Justin Fields was a better overall prospect. But I don't have any grudge against the Falcons taking Kyle Pitts. I think Kyle Pitts probably made a little bit more sense than the offensive lineman in Penny Sewell for the Falcons, just because, again, going back to the point I made earlier, the Falcons' concerns on the offensive line were more on the interior, and Penny Sewell didn't really necessarily address those issues, and you were just basically improving the offensive tackle position, but it didn't really solve the main problem with your offensive line. And granted, the Falcons, we can talk about whether or not their other subsequent moves really solved that issue as well. But it was one of those things where I think selecting Kyle Pitts made a ton of sense. But, personally, I think you got to go with the quarterback, at least if you believe that quarterback can be the franchise guy. I had that belief. Obviously, the Falcons didn't necessarily have that belief. And so, if you don't have that belief, then don't, force the pick. But it's going to be a controversial pick until we get to a point where Justin Fields clearly washes out of the league, or Kyle Pitts winds up having this Hall of Fame career and leads the Falcons to a Super Bowl. Short of that, it's going to be considered a controversy.
Falcons did lose 23-3. The offense did look a little stagnant, but who stood out to you the most from that first preseason game and really helped them moving forward as the preseason moves along?
Yeah, I think the offense struggled, so there really weren't any standouts on offense, but it was really the defense that shined. I think Dean Pease dialing up blitzes, sort of signaled what we kind of expect with the Falcons defense this upcoming season. They were able to get like 4 or 5 sacks on Friday night against the Titans, several of them coming off of blitzes and bringing guys on that second level. So I think certainly as a coaching standpoint, Dean Pease shined. But in terms of individual players, the 3 sort of players that really stood out watching the game Friday night and then rewatching it yesterday for me on defense were Marlon Davidson, their 2020 second round pick up front. I think played really well and really getting his first kind of extended action because we didn't have the preseason last year. He was dealing with injuries last year, COVID last year. So he kind of had an underwhelming rookie season. And it looks like he's, at least based off of a half of football, starting to deliver on some of the hype that he performed. His fellow draft selection in Jalen Hawkins, a 4th-round safety last year, didn't really do much again last year as a rookie, but did make several plays on the back end. And I think the Falcons secondary struggled for the most part in this game. It was really about their front seven, but I think Jalen Hawkins really did stand out among those guys on the back end. And then you had linebacker Dorian Etheridge, which was an undrafted free agent out of Louisville, made a ton of tackles. He had 3 tackles for loss. He was showcasing his range all over the field. You still have some questions about his ability to play at the point of attack, to diagnose things. He made some mistakes in coverage, but he's a fast, rangy defender that plays, 100 miles per hour. And you like to see that from young players, to borrow a phrase from the infamous Dan Quinn. He played very fast and physical on Friday night. And I know that those terms are loaded to a lot of Falcon fans, but you do like to see that. There's no mistake why coaches like fast and physical players. And I think Dorian Etheridge lived up to that mantra.
Kind of reminds me of people saying, Dan Quinn would have never done this. Dan Quinn would have never done that. I see that a lot on Twitter and just in the Falcon community, which is all fun and games. I have to throw this in there, man. The Justin Field hype train. He was 14 for 20, 143 yards passing, threw a touchdown pass, 33 yards on the ground, scored another touchdown. Your thoughts on his first preseason game? We know that he was the guy you thought they would go with at number 4. And your message to Falcon fans who they keep bringing it up, like, we should have got Fields. We should have got Fields. So what's your take on Justin Fields and so far so good with what he's doing?
Yeah, I mean, every preseason you get these high round draft picks, particularly at the quarterback position. And every year we overhype these guys' performance and we look for every glimpse. The Bears have not had a good quarterback in literally 70 years, right? They have just had mediocre quarterback play for 70 years. And so it's understandable why Bears fans are hyped. And certainly you can understand why any team gets hyped about the quarterback that they selected, that they think is going to be their star. We know that doesn't often happen. It's about 50-50 at best in terms of these guys living up to the hype. But I think Justin Fields, in terms of what you wanted to see from him, we knew he had a big arm. We knew he had the athleticism. I think he showed that in his first game. So if you're a Bears fan, you're looking at that first game and you're very excited about his future, as opposed to, sticking with Andy Dalton. We've seen Andy Dalton in the league for a decade. We know exactly what Andy Dalton is. And so I think it's understandable why people are excited. And certainly if you're a Falcon fan, you look at, if you were on Team Fields, you look at that game and you say, man, why can't we have that excitement? And again, it goes back to what you talked about earlier and what I talked about on Twitter. If the Falcons had gotten just a little taste of Kyle Pitts on Friday night, I think you could have mitigated some of those concerns about Justin Fields. You wouldn't have as many people having that, that fear of missing out with this high level rookie that, all fans of all teams get excited about in the preseason. That's just the nature of fandom. That's the nature of football. We you have a podcast. I do a daily podcast. This is what the things that we have to talk about in the month of August, and overhyping young players or being overly negative when, someone like a Josh Andrews struggles in a preseason game or AJ McCarron or something like that. That's just the nature of the beast. So, I think it's understandable why a lot of people looked at that Justin Fields performance and sort of looked at it and say, why can't we have that? And I think the Falcons, could have solved that problem by just, playing Kyle Pitts for 2 series on Friday night.
And we can't wait to see how the Falcons play Saturday against the Dolphins. Am I tripping, Aaron, to think when they keep saying win now mode, that I should expect the playoffs? Is that thought just crazy to come out and say that? Is it crazy for Falcon fans to think when they're saying win now mode, we're not looking to rebuild, that playoffs is what Falcon fans should expect?
Yeah, I think it's fair for Falcon fans to expect the playoffs. So the Falcons have missed the playoffs for 3 years in a row. I mean, the main reason why they fired Dan Quinn was because the expectation that this team was a playoff team and was underachieving the last 3 years. And so I think fans should expect their team to make the playoffs every single year, especially when you make the decision that the Falcons made, which is sticking with Matt Ryan, a veteran quarterback. And going with, the quote unquote win now, and every conversation that the team has had publicly has suggested that they're not rebuilding. They're expecting to win now. I think it's fair to be a little skeptical of whether this team is situated from a talent standpoint, having lost, arguably their most talented player in Julio Jones, and having some of the issues that they have up front on the offensive line. concerns in the running game, concerns on the defense, if they are really situated to win now and make the playoffs this upcoming season. But I think Falcon fans are more than justified for having those expectations. And, depending on the day, you catch me, I have those same expectations, just depending on, whether I got 8 hours of sleep in the night determines whether or not I feel like this is a 7-win team, or is this a team that could potentially win 9 or 10 wins and really challenge for one of those wild card spots. And I think if their offense can click, if the offensive line can come together, they can run the football, and we can see more of Dean Pease making more out of less, like we saw on Friday night with his blitzes and the pass rush and the secondary coming together. I think there's reasons to think that the Falcons can be a 9 or 10 win team and push for a wild card spot this upcoming season. But it's certainly not guaranteed. But I think, as you say, the Falcons, talking point of being win now mode is putting those expectations on it. And, I think it's more than fair to have those expectations and also to have some questions about it.
Absolutely. Aaron, thanks for joining me. We have to do this again. Thanks for your honesty, the knowledge you bring. Aaron Freeman, Locked On Falcons. We're also presented by Y'all Sox and Your Future Media. Thank you for joining me today.
Appreciate you having me.